What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time. I'm Colin Newby of 97.5 The Fanatic and 93.3 WMMR, coming to you weekly with Philly Sports Talk. Got a little bit of a shorter show today. I'm recording on Christmas Eve morning and using whatever voice I have left after being sick for the past almost a week, really, since the last episode almost. But I'm still going to double dip with some Eagles talk and some Phillies talk because the Eagles finally ended their winning streak on Sunday, but I think they're legitimately in Super Bowl contention this year, so I'll be making that a bigger focus, even though I'm not covering on site at the link from now until the end of the season. I want to go a little bit more in depth with the Phillies, though. Their offseason picture came together a lot better this week, which isn't necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but more so in the sense that it's shaping up and making sense as to what to expect going into next season. But we'll kick it off with the biggest story in town. Let's get it back to the Eagles. Got a loss down in Washington in an absolutely wild game, and Jaden Daniels deserves to be the story. I found myself pushing back on that a little bit too much right after the game ended, and when I heard the national people gushing over Jaden Daniels, but he does deserve a lot of credit. A great game, 5 total touchdowns, and he ends up beating one of the best teams in the NFL. The Eagles' defense didn't have their best game, letting up the 3 TDs in the fourth quarter, but my real takeaway was that they didn't play complementary football. The Eagles didn't. Yeah, the offense, defense, and the special teams who needed to feed off each other after the Jalen Hurts injury, and I don't think they did that very well at all. If you played well in certain phases of the game, you can compensate for a backup quarterback. You're forced to make changes on the fly. One of your best players is off the field. Your most valuable player is off the field. You need to come together and make enough plays to win the game in those phases and help compensate for some of the deficiencies that a backup quarterback is going to bring. The Eagles did not do that on Sunday. The offense, it really wasn't terrible after Jalen Hurts went out. Remember, they only had 7 points when Kenny Pickett came in the game. They got to 21 pretty easily. Pickett finished off a drive that was already down towards the red zone, and then Saquon Barkley had that huge 68-yard run with Pickett in the game at the very end of the first quarter. But after that, and at that point, Pickett hadn't really done very much. After that, you could see how his presence in the game really changed the flow, changed the complexion of that whole game. And they didn't do enough in the second half to close out Washington. The running game pretty much shut down after the first quarter. They didn't take pressure off the passing game at all. You had Two Gloves Pickett back there, not exactly the most aesthetically pleasing quarterback. He does not have a good arm. He does not make the best decisions under pressure. But I would still say he was mediocre and not terrible. He, especially considering those 2 fourth down throws he made in the fourth quarter. The first, I believe it was a 4th and 2. He hit an out route to Devontae Smith. And then either 1 or 2 series later, he hit A.J. Brown on a 4th and 7, threw for about 5 yards. But he got the ball in the hands of the Eagles' best playmaker, who did the rest of the work and ran for the first down, breaking a tackle. So Pickett, certainly not the long-term option. I don't think he's a starting quarterback in the NFL by any means, but I will make the case that he's a backup, considering how brutally ugly certain other NFL backups actually are. But if the Eagles' offense were to have played complementary football, that would have meant capitalizing with one game-changing TD after the defense forced one of those 5 turnovers. The offense just kind of shut down and settled for field goals in the second half of that game, and that left the door open for Jaden Daniels to take over and win it with touchdowns. the defense did their part to leave it open for that complimentary win, and they just didn't get enough help. The NFL is an offensive league. Now, I do think the defense should have won it on their own by getting enough stops in that second half. That's part of what I talked about last week, is the defense could compensate for shortcomings on the other side of the ball, which not many modern defenses can do. They didn't really execute that on Sunday, so they deserve blame here. They gave up 36 points on 5 touchdowns, so it's not like they're off the hook, but I'm not blaming them as the root cause for this game at all. And if you look at the third phase of the game, the special teams, they were not good enough. The kickoff coverage was absolutely brutal on Sunday, so Michael Clay's got to get back to the drawing board. And you also had that one penalty by Sidney Brown, who gave the opposing offense 5 free yards going into that last drive. They only had to go 57 to score that winning touchdown. The special teams has got to do better than that with the game on the line. And this is after the fumble against Pittsburgh the previous week. Cooper DeJean fumbled the ball. That's an isolated mistake. Yeah, I know, but it's still a special teams turnover. And then the following week, they come out with probably their worst effort of the season, and they did nothing to set up that D with short fields all day. So the special teams really needs to improve. Throw Jake Elliott into the mix there. I know he hit the 50-yard field goal, but I'm not ready to say that he's solved some of the issues that we've seen throughout the season. My Monday reaction piece on 975thefanatic.com was about how they did not stay with the complementary approach after the Jalen Hurts injury. It's what the Commanders taught us about the Eagles' running game. Get the link in the show notes. So you had Saquon Barkley start on 7 carries for 109 yards, and that was all in the first quarter. After that, it was a sharp cutoff. Final 22 carries for 41 yards. That was not directly when Hurts went out. I already mentioned that the 68-yard touchdown came with Pickett in the game, but there was clearly a change in Washington's approach there. This was an underwhelming game from the Eagles' offensive line. Jeff Stoutland University, and they started so well, but the offensive line didn't win it for them, and that's a team strength. That's part of what I'm talking about. Nobody stepped up to close this game for the Eagles. And those zone reads that Jalen Hurts runs, he's a valuable threat as a runner, and that's more of an element of the Eagles' offense than I think we give credit for sometimes, because you can't really make that tangible unless you're really scrutinizing the film, which I don't do. As I mentioned, I don't cover the Eagles. I am an outside observer, but the strength of this running game all season has been feeding off of each other. That was the whole point of signing Saquon Barkley. You had running backs the past couple years, especially Miles Sanders, who are leaving meat on the bone. This offense is tailor-made for a running back to just come in and dominate. You have this big offensive line, one of the heaviest in the league. They're very physical. You have Jalen Hurts and that threat with the RPO game, the zone reads, whatever you want to call the way that he keeps opposing defenses off balance. And that's why Saquon Barkley has been so rejuvenated to have a career year, because it's a great situation for him, and they've been rolling on all cylinders. But I think when Jalen Hurts goes out, you still have probably the best running back in the league and probably the best offensive line in the league. So when they can't get it done just because the quarterback's out of the game, I don't think it's any kind of excuse to just throw away. Now, if Jalen Hurts comes back, these issues probably will just solve themselves. You saw that 2 years ago when Gardner Minshew came in and the Eagles went 0-2 in his 2 starts. Jalen Hurts comes back. They win the final game of the season, get home field advantage. So I don't think this is a long-term issue. And that's another element of the game where Washington deserves credit, because they're a decent team. I still think the Eagles are much better, and if they do match up in the wild card round again at the Link, I think the Eagles win it. But my real big picture takeaway is the absence of Jalen Hurts. That's the real storyline now that they can move on from that game. A tough NFC East battle. You come out on the losing end, but you got to think about the concussion on Jalen Hurts because they're not going on a deep playoff run if Kenny Pickett has to start. And I think he should be okay. Hurts should be okay. But that's not really something I can judge or anyone on the outside can judge. You just have to wait for the news to drop, and that's really the next point of impact on the Eagles' season and their outlook going into the playoffs with the 2 division games left, the Cowboys and the Giants. So we'll get to some Phillies hot stove talk after the break with the Eagles on the brink of the playoff season and looking like they're going to lock up the 2 seed going into the NFL postseason.
If it's happening in Philly sports, Colin Newby's talking about it. Go with him behind the scenes of legendary sports venues with the best athletes and the most iconic media personalities of the greatest sports city in the world.
Felt like I had to get that intro in for some Phillies hot stove talk. I'm glad I could use the Father Christmas one. In my mind, that's the best Christmas song. Can't Turn You Loose, though. Integral part of this show. I don't know if all the listeners realize, but it was played at Citizens Bank Park as the victory song when the bell rang in the Jimmy Rollins, Chase Utley years back surrounding the 2008 World Series. But that was immediately after the victories, and then a couple years later, that's when they added High Hopes when Harry Kalas passed away. But head to 975thefanatic.com for more written coverage. I have Where Did the Phillies Stand in the MLB offseason after the Jesus Luzardo trade. You can get that link in the show notes also. But that article is about the moves coming together. None of the big guys that I broke down ended up with the Phillies. You have Alex Bregman on the open market, Teoscar Hernandez, Jerickson Profar, Anthony Santander. Dave Dombrowski doesn't really seem like he went after those guys all that much in the first place. Instead, he ends up with Jordan Romano. It's not Romano, by the way. It's Romano. That's going to be pronounced incorrectly like a million times with the Phillies. But then they got Max Kepler to play left field, and then the trade for Jesus Luzardo came over the weekend. So these guys are 3 veteran players, and all 3 of them are very similar in their track records, and that they all showed really great upside in 2023, career seasons or close to them, and then they all dipped last season, had to deal with injuries and just down performances and off years. Phillies also added swingman Joe Ross to the pitching staff. Dombrowski thinks he's rotation depth, and if the rotation is in full force at certain points of the season, Joe Ross is probably going to be in the bullpen. But I think the national outlook going into the offseason for the Phillies, that's a little bullish, and I'm speaking in hindsight, knowing what they did, because I was following, especially Buster Olney, who I consider the best in the business, probably. But these national guys, they looked and saw all the elements there. You have Dave Dombrowski, a future Hall of Fame executive here, who has built a reputation over decades of being aggressive, really going all in. He's not afraid to move prospects. That's his reputation around the majors. You have John Middleton in a major market, very demanding, deep pockets owner, and you have a Phillies roster of players who are getting towards the end. They're on the back 9 of their careers, a lot of these guys, in a window of World Series contention that is probably close to ending. It's closer to the end than it is to the beginning, we'll put it that way. But I think other factors kind of played into a less active offseason than a lot of people realized was going to happen. The Phillies payroll right now, as it stands as of this recording on Christmas Eve, it's second most in the majors, and it's over the highest luxury tax threshold. And that means that you're paying 110%. You're paying over double for every dollar you spend over that top luxury tax threshold. So John Middleton is paying a lot of money. Please don't underestimate that if you're judging how they didn't really pursue all these big stars like Santander, Teoscar Hernandez, whoever you want to throw in that group. The payroll was a little bit more of a restriction than I think anyone, myself included, gave credit for heading into the offseason. Also, the Phillies showed a lot of restraint in not wanting to trade their prospects. Dave Dombrowski has that quote about how they built the farm system back up over the last couple years under Preston Mattingly, and I think the organization collectively is very proud of that. I didn't expect it to be such a deterrent to offseason deals, but even if you think back to the trade deadline in July, the deal breaker for the Phillies to acquire Garrett Crochet was not including Andrew Painter in a deal with the White Sox. Apparently they wanted to trade Aiden Miller and Justin Crawford, but even that took a while to get there. And then this offseason, they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to part with their second and third highest guys behind Painter. And I think certain other deals that were discussed, it seemed like the Phillies had a little bit more of an attachment to those three guys than we realized. One thing Dombrowski has indicated in his actions, he acquired Carlos Estevez back at the deadline, and George Clausen was the centerpiece there. He's a 22-year-old who's a little further away from making his major league debut. I think those top three guys, Painter, Miller, and Crawford, are a little closer. So Dombrowski's thinking in terms of grouping these prospects, maybe the younger ones are a little bit more available, and that would certainly align with what happened in the Jesus Luzardo trade, giving up Starlin Caba, who's only 19. He's pretty highly rated, but he's not really close to being big league ready. Plus, on the trade market, I think they overestimated Alec Boehm's value. I think he ultimately will be back. Gun to my head, 50-50 decision here. I say Alec Boehm is still on the roster next season, even though it seems like they made a lot of attempts to trade him. Could still happen. I'm going to discuss that in a few minutes, but I think Alec Boehm's staying. I wanted to break down the three major acquisitions, Kepler, Luzardo, and Romano here, just kind of give a little bit of a background on each. Kepler is not my favorite acquisition if we're going just by opinion. This guy's going to play left field, and Dombrowski said that they want him to be an everyday left fielder. They've also said that about Brandon Marsh in the past, and that hasn't materialized. But Kepler, I don't know he's the best fit for this lineup. He has a lot of the same qualities as Marsh. Hitting on the left side, he's not the best against right-handers. And the thing that stuck out to me is that his plate discipline numbers have fluctuated over the years. He was very good in 2019 for the Twins. That was kind of his breakout season when he became an everyday outfielder. And then after he had those career numbers, he improved his plate discipline in 21, 22, 23, and he had some decent years there, but he really slipped. He had a very high chase rate last season. The Phillies were 25th in the majors as a team in chase rate. That's been such a focus of the conversation, is how they're such free swingers. Well, Kepler had an even higher chase rate, 30.5 last season. So you added a guy that actually would increase that problem more than he would help it. I guess they're betting on him going back towards how he was the previous 3 seasons. That is a larger sample size, so I'm willing to give it a chance in that sense, but I don't love the move to get Max Kepler overall. If you've read my work on 975thefanatic.com, I was a fan of pursuing Jerickson Profar and Teoscar Hernandez. I realize they're more expensive and they would have required more than 1-year deals, but Kepler got $10 million next season. I don't think that's too good of a price for what he brings to the lineup, and he is not the type of guy that I'm going to sit here and say is going to push you over the edge to the World Series. I just don't see him in that vein. So I definitely understood why Phillies fans were pretty adamant from what I saw on social media and then the reception at 97.5 The Fanatic, especially on the best show ever with Ricky Bowe, the fact that this guy didn't seem like the best fit. And it was fair to be pretty pessimistic about the offseason picture overall after looking at the Max Kepler move and thinking that that was their big acquisition, the biggest splash that they were going to make this winter. Couple days later, Dave Dombrowski does go out and do something much bigger, something that helps the team a lot better, and something I can be sold on as a move that could push them over the top to a World Series. The trade for Jesus Luzardo with the Miami Marlins. Now, Jesus Luzardo is 27 years old, left-hander with some pretty good stuff. He throws 96 is what he averaged with his 4-seamer the last couple years. Also mixes in a slider and a changeup very well. He had a great season in 2023. He struggled with some arm injuries last year, only made 12 starts. But I think this is a great move to shore up the Phillies' rotation. You've got Wheeler, Nola, Sanchez, Suarez, and then remember at the end of last year, that 5th starter spot was an absolute disaster. It didn't give them enough of a chance to compete in the final at least month or so of the season, probably a little bit more than that. But Jesus Luzardo probably makes this, in my mind, the best starting rotation in Major League Baseball. Dave Dombrowski came out and said that he's always felt the best way to give yourself a chance to win in Major League Baseball is to throw out a great starting rotation. I think he put his money where his mouth is on that one. He gets a pitcher who's relatively young with 2 years left of club control, which is helpful in the payroll situation that I talked about. Luzardo's probably only going to make like $6 million this year, which is a total bargain. They did have to give up prospects to get him, but I think this move makes a lot more sense than anything else the Phillies have done this entire offseason. I thought it was an interesting nugget that Dombrowski dropped. My friend Matt Watson over at Philly Sports Network is actually the one who brought this up to Dave. He asked about dealing within the division with the Miami Marlins to acquire Luzardo, and Dombrowski made a pretty interesting comment. He said it's not necessarily a deal breaker to be trading with an NL East team, and while you don't love to do it, he was willing to go ahead and do the deal because Miami is in a different point with their organization where they're not really competing with the Phillies, a team that's trying to win a World Series right now. Miami is a couple years away and kind of selling off pieces. So thought it's cool to learn more of the big picture thing about how these trade markets operate, and Dombrowski revealed a little bit behind the curtain there. So great job by Matt to dig that one up, and it's something that I'll certainly keep in mind when evaluating these trades in the future, that's a way that some of these GMs or MLB front offices think. And Matt, he's one of those grinders. He's down at the ballpark plenty trying to dig up any information he can. So happy to see him get his question in first of all. And anybody who's listening out there, younger professional, blogger, whatever it is that you do, he's one person that you should strive to be for getting credentials. I've seen him working hard, getting to charity events with the Phillies. That's how you got to scrape, take whatever you can get. And he got his reward on Dave Dombrowski's off-season Zoom conference, getting one of those final questions in. But my third and final part of the article on 975thefanatic.com, where the Phillies stand in MLB offseason after Jesus Luzardo trade, was what still could happen after all of these moves have come together. And I think Alec Bohm is the big remaining question here. Now, Rob Thompson and Dave Dombrowski have now both gone on the record after these trade talks look less likely, and the timing of their comments seems way off. But they're saying that Alec Bohm should take it as a compliment that he's mentioned in the trade rumors all the time because he's a good player and that other teams want him. I think that is, I won't mince words here, that's a load of crap. I think that is a way to try to mitigate the situation that they very much want to trade him and that they realize that the market has kind of dampened on him. As I said earlier, they overestimated what they thought they could get back. Now they think there's a higher chance of him staying on the team, so they want to have a little trap door that they're building themselves here by saying these things publicly about Alec Bohm, when they probably could have said that all along before these trade rumors dampened a little bit. And I think it's very similar to what happened last offseason with Nick Castellanos. I had heard early in the offseason that they wanted to trade him. They wanted Castellanos gone, dangled him in the trade market, and the high salary was something that was a deal breaker for other teams. After they figured out there was no market, they went through the media. The guy that I mentioned earlier, Buster Olney, he got some information saying that, no, Castellanos was never available. Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that the Phillies threw that out there after I had heard that there was no market for Castellanos. And then Buster Olney comes out early this offseason with the Alec Bohm trade rumors and says, Dave Dombrowski's no fool. He knows how to go through the media. Well, connect the dots on this one. I think Castellanos was available last offseason and Bohm was available this offseason. Neither of them should take it as a compliment because the Phillies were probably trying to trade both of them. So I think that door's still open, even though it's not nearly as likely to happen. But one thing that I think could materialize over this winter, Alex Bregman is still a free agent. If he goes to a major market team who can outbid another team that's interested in acquiring the best third baseman, maybe that team is looking for somewhat of a consolation prize to get Alec Bohm as a third baseman, so the trade market opens back up after New Year's. It's a possibility and just something to keep in mind, but also remember if that goes down, it creates a third base hole that Dombrowski would need to fill with an ensuing move. Also, the thing that I've really been talking about for months, I've been reading the tea leaves on, is a potential Ranger Suarez trade, and listen to a short clip from Dave Dombrowski's media availability after that Luzardo trade. The question from Jim Salisbury of All PHLY.
Now that you've added some quality starting pitching and some starting pitching depth, would you be tempted to maybe move a starter from your existing rotation to maybe get better in another area? Or are you committed to moving forward with this rotation you have and seeing how it all works?
Well, we like our rotation. I like it a great deal and like the depth that we have now. which is always a concern. And you're always open-minded to anything. And I will say some clubs called right away as soon as they heard that we had to come to have made the trade. It's not, no, I mean, again, you listen to anything, but I really like the idea of having the 5 starters out there with Ross and Walker. And then we do have some good young pitching coming in addition to Painter. It's not quite there, but it's amazing how some of those names start coming up now in trade discussions. So you never have enough starting pitching depth, but I think we're starting to build a lot more.
So Salisbury didn't mention Ranger Suarez out loud. Dombrowski didn't either. You're saying anyone in the starting rotation, but I've said all along that trading Ranger Suarez would make sense, and Dombrowski probably could have shut the door on the record right there if he really wanted to. But going along with certain things that I've said about Bohm or about Castellanos, Dombrowski knows what he's doing. He's been around for decades. He knows how to work the media. He knows that he could calculate what he says on the record to have Ranger Suarez hear it, to have competing MLB front offices hear what he says. And he chose his words there. He chose not to shut down a Ranger Suarez trade. And in the offseason picture, I don't think a Ranger Suarez trade is imminent. I don't think it makes as much sense to flip him for a hitter as it did, like I was saying at the beginning of the offseason, because they signed an outfielder with Max Kepler who fills their most obvious hole already. But I don't think it's crazy to expect a Suarez trade either. Remember who this guy's agent is. It's Scott Boras, the one who made that annoying swim trunks comment about the Phillies. I don't know if anybody heard that from the MLB winter meetings, but he said, just because they haven't dove in and made the splash in the pool yet doesn't mean they have their swim trunks on. Yeah, whatever, Scott Boras. But I think a trade with Ranger could possibly happen in July. I know that doesn't seem like the most logical thing with a team that's hoping to be in contention for the World Series. Do you want to trade a guy in his prime age at the trade deadline? No, you certainly don't. You're not itching to do it or anything like that. But remember what happened with Sir Anthony Dominguez and Greg Soto last year. They traded 2 guys that were in the bullpen and just kind of reshuffled their parts for something that they thought, in theory, would fit a little bit better to win a World Series last season. They were willing to move major leaguers off their roster. And remember, next season, that could align with the same timeline as Andrew Painter coming up to the majors. They've already said that they want him to get a little bit of a late start, not really have a spring training to start the minor league season on time, but then he'll pitch a few innings in the minors and hopefully get up to the majors probably around July. So if there's a spot in the rotation that they want him to come into and they're confident enough for him to come into, maybe he slides in for Ranger Suarez and you do flip him at the deadline thinking that he's going to leave in free agency next winter anyway if you don't want to offer him that long-term contract that he's going to want. So don't count a trade out. I don't think you can ever really shut the door on Dave Dombrowski. He's just that kind of executive where he keeps things close to the vest, and if you don't see something coming, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to happen. And there's also the factor of what I like to steal from Jason Stark. He said this on the Best Show Ever last year, the footballization of every sport now. We think that everything is like football where free agency starts, everybody signs right away in March, then you get the draft, everything goes down at the draft. Well, the MLB offseason is not like that. It's very prolonged, and any moves can happen going up to spring training, and a lot of them even happen during spring training. So this is not a sprint. You saw how long the Kepler and Luzardo and Romano moves took to materialize. I wouldn't be shocked if some of these other moves go along the same lines, especially what I said about Alec Boehm and if Bregman were to sign with another team. But that's going to wrap it up for the pre-Christmas edition of First Time, Long Time. Have a good holiday, Philadelphia, and I'll be back before New Year's with a new episode, the final episode of 2024.